Hello and welcome to Sick Lessons, a podcast where people share life lessons they've learned from living with chronic illness, mental illness, and/or disability. Each episode features a new person and the sick lessons, wisdom, and insights they've gained into life from chronic pain. We may be chronically ill, but we do have some pretty wicked lessons to share with the world. So tune in and hear us out. Hi, Melissa. It's nice to have you with us today. Would you like to introduce yourself a little bit? Tell us something that is interesting or unique about you or your circumstances.
So I'm Melissa. I always start with, I'm from melissaversusfibromyalgia.com.
Right.
How I talk online. But in real life, I'm actually a mum to 4 boys, 8 and under.
Yeah.
So that tends to be unique.
I don't know how you handle it with chronic illness in the mix.
Well, I'm a lot better now than I was when I had my first 2 children. So it's kind of gotten easier, even as it's gotten harder.
Okay. So that means it's kind of like it's already chaotic. So more chaos is kind of just the same. Yeah.
Pretty much. Yes. That's life, right?
Yeah, that's life. You have a book, that's right.
Oh, yeah. So, I've written a couple of books, but this year I wrote my 3rd. Well, what I found is, like, I was writing all these articles on my blog, and they're all really important. But by the time you've written 300, it's really hard to point people in a good order, and, it just gets really difficult to navigate.
That's right.
So it was more about trying to make the story coherent and to communicate, like, important things in an order. Also, it was just a dream come true. I've always wanted to write a book. So I happened to just work out that this is my mission now. So it's all aligned.
That's one of my dreams too. So I need to take some cues from you. All right. So let's dive in and let's ask, how has chronic illness impacted your life? And just briefly, what chronic illnesses do you live with?
Well, the only thing I'm diagnosed with is fibromyalgia, but there's quite a few question marks. But essentially, it's chronic pain and chronic fatigue and chronic insomnia, which a lot of people can relate to those symptoms. But it's really interesting asking how it's impacted my life, because it started so young. I don't really know my life any other way. So I couldn't necessarily distinguish. Well, I was diagnosed at 24, but the symptoms came on really slowly from as a teenager. So I don't remember sleeping well or not being tired. So that's just how I do life. So yeah, I can only guess at what it would have been like if I didn't have chronic illness.
I can relate. What are your top 3 biggest life lessons learned from chronic illness and chronic pain?
It's a little bit difficult, again, just because it's been my whole life, but I think I've learnt a lot of things from a young age that maybe you wouldn't learn a bit later. So just about judgment and gaslighting and what happens when you are a minority in something. If you're not doing what everyone expects, if you're not achieving, if you're not just cookie cutter, that level of judgment and how people look down on you. You can't just be normal and do all the things. So I think I learned that really young, which is a shame, but it's really made me want to push back against it. So a lot of what I talk about online is pushing back against those things and accepting all different types of normal. The other one is that the normal sense of accomplishments, they're not everything. And so I guess, again, I had to learn really young that that's not something we need to strive towards. And everybody achieves different things, and it's not all a straight line. You finish university, you get a good job, you achieve certain things, you buy a house, you have kids. It's not a certain you don't have to do it a certain way, and you don't have to kill yourself trying.
Would you say it's to do with building your self-worth and self-esteem in a way at a really young age, such that, the opinion of society or stigma doesn't really affect you and how you want to live your life?
Now, yes.
And yes. And you mentioned about accomplishments, productivity, that sort of thing, right? So your life, even for a normal, healthy person, I would say is pretty intense. 4 kids, you run a few workshops, you have written 3 books, and you live with chronic illness and chronic pain. So how do you manage that? I mean, it's a load even for a someone that's healthy. I mean, people complain when they have 1 kid already, so you have 4 with chronic illness and everything. So would you like to share more about that?
Yeah, for sure. Well, it puts everything in perspective when you lose most of your 20s, right? When you're not able to do a lot of the things you want to do. The only thing I had the ability to do was get through work. So all those things that you think you would achieve and you want to achieve, you just can't do. And so once I started getting a little bit better, I would do a little bit more, and I'd get a little bit better and I'd do a little bit more. But also I've just learned to be really efficient and really organized and utilize my time. So I don't sit around watching TV. Like, I rest constructively, obviously, when I need to rest, but I'm not sitting around watching TV, doing any of those kinds of things. Like, I'm always doing something that moves me towards my goals, whether it's managing the kids. But it's really taken until the last few years to get comfortable in myself. And so I've started to get really outspoken. And like, just really recently, I've learned, yes, I do more than normal people. And I manage a lot. And so I actually have to pull myself back, and I have to remind people in my life that I am an overachiever, and that's not helpful. So yeah, it's that constant pulling back, because when you function at 30, 40, 50% for a long time, when you get more energy, it feels ridiculous not to use it.
But then again, it's always kind of like a balancing act, right? So a lot of us with chronic illness, pacing is a huge word in the community. For those who don't know what it means to kind of like be aware of the energy you have and to pace it throughout the day so that you don't burn out, right? And hit a pain flare, which is just not worth it. How do you pace yourself in a normal day with everything that's going on around you?
Yeah, well, it can get difficult, but I'm a big, big fan of pacing. And I think that's a big part of how I got to where I am. So I have what I talk about in my overall pillars. So, I go to bed early and I get up at a certain time. I have a rest in the afternoon, what I call my full stop rest. So when the kids are having a nap, I do a yoga nidra guided meditation, and that's non-negotiable. It's very rare that I miss it. And so that's like the framework of my day, right? The bedtimes and the rest. And then across the day for the rest of it, it's about first putting the hard stuff, or the stuff that takes a lot of brain power, at the time where I have the most brain power. So being sensible about when I'm scheduling things. For example, I'll never be writing a blog post at 6 p.m. It's always going to be done in the morning. Or if I'm working, I prefer to get the work done in the morning. And then I leave the light stuff for later.
That's kind of how I do it too, leaving the light stuff to the end of the day when I'm bringing it in. What happens if your routine is impacted? Say the kid is sick, or, something major happens, then what happens? Like, how do you manage that?
I mean, it all goes out the window. Like, we had COVID, and since then my children have basically been sick consistently. And so we all had a stomach bug last week. While in the midst of vomiting myself, I was cleaning up 3 other people's vomit. So you just get on with it as best you can.
That's mom life.
Yes. So you get on with it. But I think what really helps is that I've internalized now my bare minimums. And so I'm really strict about my rest. And if I can't get it in my traditional way, I will find a way to figure it out. So like when I had COVID, for example, for a good few weeks, I actually had to have 2 rests a day just to manage. So it's like in amongst all those things, putting those non-negotiables in there that need to be done for me to keep functioning. Yeah.
Okay. That's interesting, because it seems like you've learned how to make really efficient use of your time and even rest throughout the day and see that as productive, right? It's something we struggle with in modern day society. And that's pretty impressive, because even though many of us, like me, live with chronic illness, it's a huge thing we struggle with. It's like when we're feeling better, we really push and then we fall sick again. And it's like a never ending vicious cycle. And you mentioned judgment and gaslighting. So what kind of experiences have you had with that?
Yeah, so it took me a really long time to get diagnosed, which is obviously really common for people with chronic illness. I don't have a very good memory at all, really. That's just a hallmark of the chronic illness thing. But I have really strong memories of seeing doctors when I was like 17 years old. And those characteristic symptoms of fibromyalgia were the things that made them look at me like I was making it up. And I just felt so keenly that they thought I was making it up and it wasn't real and I was wasting their time. I don't know what 17-year-old wants to go to a specialist's office, but
Right.
they made me feel so terrible and did nothing to help and kind of left me on my own. And then from then on, I was too frightened to ever really ask for help. And I think that internalized, because I realized recently I was holding on to a doctor because he understood the fibro and he prescribes the medicine I need, which is off-label. He had nothing new to try, but he was willing to look at research when I brought it to him. And the medical practice wasn't working for me the way they were running or my children, and I was too scared to leave in case I got a worse doctor. So it's really something that even till now, you're so vulnerable if you don't have the right doctor, and if the medical professionals you're looking for help, if they let you down, you're in a real vulnerable position. So I think I learned that just extremely young.
I get what you mean, because I think all of us have stories like that with doctors. There are really good doctors, empathetic ones, and then you get the opposite. How do you speak up for yourself or stand up for yourself in everyday life, say people on the streets, and also in a medical setting?
That's something I'm still learning. It's difficult, and it's only come as I've learned and practiced. But I do find I revert a little bit, particularly when it's in a medical setting, or if we get into a situation where it's a bit confrontational, my nervous system will rise. And so I'm like, can't do it. And so there's been a lot of times recently where I haven't been able to stand up for myself very well, because it actually takes a lot of energy and ability to be able to do it. Especially like if brain fog and fatigue are an issue, it's very hard. Once you're like in a confrontational situation, your nervous system goes up and you're like, can't think of what to say. But I'm trying my best, and I try with a conversational tone. But I think what I've learned is that you can recognize when someone is just never going to understand because they don't want to.
Yeah. So you just kind of, don't even waste energy going there, right?
You have to try and maneuver around that one.
Either I bring someone to speak up for me when I'm like too exhausted or too much in pain, right? Say at the A&E, or I have it all written down on my phone, so I just show it to them. Like, look, because they get things mixed up. Yeah, so it helps a little. At least they know what medications I'm on, who are my doctors. Because sometimes when I'm in pain, I don't even remember myself, right? Yeah, and in an emergency, everyone's just panicking.
That's a good idea to write it down.
Yeah, you have curiosity. Do you do like yoga in the hospital? If you're hospitalized, yoga in bed, right?
That is my thing. I haven't actually been hospitalized. The few times I've been sick enough that I would consider going, I'm too scared for how they would treat me. And to be quite honest, I'm too sick to even get into transportation or even sit around in the emergency room, because when I'm at my worst, it's usually involving a migraine. So noise and light would be okay.
So more of migraine than
the worst. Yeah. So because fibro tends to be like, you do have flares and spikes, but it's more like a long kind of thing, whereas a migraine is just like through the roof and then comes down again.
Right.
Yeah.
So cute. That's interesting, because a lot of people with chronic illness spend a lot of time in hospital. So do you ever get people from the community ask that your fibromyalgia is actually less severe than
I mean, I'm really honest about the fact that it's now considered mild on the FIQR, so that's the Fibromyalgia Impact Questionnaire Rating Scale. So the fibro is considered mild. I mean, mild compared to a normal person is still pretty intense, but I mean, it's much better now.
Exactly.
And because I'm so proactive and I keep doing the things, I don't go down, but where I started, I would have called myself moderate on the scale. And every day I didn't understand how I wasn't hospitalized. I didn't understand how I could keep going. Like each day I was like, how am I not passing out from this pain? Like it was so bad. And I had some other health issues that put me in the hospital for a brief time then, but it was very brief, and they did nothing about they didn't want anything to do with the fun. And so from that kind of bottom point is when I kind of started taking myself up, really. I've never had any luck with medical help in that way.
I think gaslighting from medical establishments is bad, but I think gaslighting from within our own community is worse, because these are people that are supposed to understand, but we're like comparing our pain levels, you know, and saying like, I don't believe you're in pain because, or you're in less pain than me. So I think that's also
I did get
bad.
called an ableist once because I talked about yoga. I talked about yoga.
Really? Why?
I was like, do you realize I do it like on a bed? And like most of my yoga is meditation, but it sounds like you've had some not good ones.
I mean, even if you try to avoid such people, they pop up. With all that, how has it shaped your personality and outlook on life? Do you think your identity has evolved because of all this that has happened?
Yeah, I reflected on this quite a lot, because it's hard to know how much is my personality and how much is in response. So, for example, I'm hyper organized and plan everything and write everything down.
Right.
But it's really hard to distinguish, is that personality or is that just how I cope? Because, brain fog, fatigue, getting things done, reducing anxiety. So if you've got everything planned and written down, it's much easier to kind of visualize it and get it done and manage all those feelings and symptoms. So I couldn't really tell you like how much of a type A personality I would be naturally, but I think organizing, whether it was natural or not, has definitely helped me manage and do all the things. So I never ever agree to things at the last minute. So anything you see on my blog or my YouTube is organized well in advance. I cannot have something hanging over me because that's not the priority, right? The children are the priority. Right. So if I need to drop something and deal with like an emergency, it's for the kids. Anything else, I have to make it not an emergency or I can't do it. So whether that came about because of living with chronic illness, it's become a bit of a strength.
I guess probably it already existed and chronic illness kind of just boosted the volume or strengthened it in a sense. So you had it at 24, right? So how were you like before that? Before
so the pain came on slowly from like 14 years old and kind of developed slowly. And so it would be a little more periodic. And I vividly remember my shoulders and my arms, like my shoulders would burn and it would come and go and the intensity would change, which is what upset the specialist so much. And then when I was 21 at university, it was my last semester, I got some kind of bug, which put me down hard. It was like maybe a flu, but the fatigue was really bad. And I eventually ended up on antibiotics, but they never told me what it was. But after that, the fatigue never went away. And then right after university, the pain escalated. Okay. So I think the pain and fatigue kind of worked together there. But all across the whole time, I never slept well. Like there's a whole history of me back and forth to the doctor. I don't sleep well. I was put on medicines for things without a diagnosis. Well,
it's like
I'm
a shot in the dark
because when I was like 20, I saw a doctor. He was just like a fill-in doctor, and he saw my history and put me on amitriptyline, which is the only medicine I was given for a very long time. So I would love to be able to go back and see if maybe he suspected fibromyalgia then, because that seems to be the first thing they were doing in New Zealand. Even till now, they still really rely heavily on amitriptyline. And that's all I was given for a great number of years. So, it'd be interesting. So
amitriptyline for fibromyalgia, that's a common one, right?
They do use it for
that
migraine.
Sounds like more like a migraine drug.
Can use it to try as a preventative, but mostly they're using it for the side effect of sedation. But there are a great many more side effects than sedation that are not so pleasant. But it was all I had for a long time, so at least it was something. But really funny that a doctor I saw once was the one who gave me the only thing with any research backing it up.
Okay, with the added knowledge you now have, what do you wish healthy people or society would do more of or stop doing?
I see people and they're like, they don't sleep and they don't exercise and they eat terribly. And I'm like, please, your health is so precious.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I do see people kind of like abusing themselves, right? Like who can drink more alcohol or something like that. And I go like...
what kind of competition is this, right? Like, who can abuse their bodies better? Doesn't make any sense to us. I mean, if you don't want your health, give it to me.
The way people regard sleep.
And if you were healthy, how would you live your life? Oh, yes.
Well, just the way people regard sleep is...
What do you think that's important?
Like it's some kind of terrible rite of passage that I should be miserable and exhausted. Really irritates me so badly, because sleep is the biggest investment we can make into our long-term health.
Yeah.
And the way people just don't look after their sleep.
Right. That's so true. And sleep, that's a tricky one, because in society now, people tend to go like, who can sleep the least and get more done, right? And that's kind of praise. I think there's a movement now to slowly push it back to something more healthy. So let's see where that goes.
I think I would live it the same way I do now, but I'd have like more time and energy to devote to individual things. I wouldn't have to cram things in so much. But I just do more with my kids. Probably do more on my blog and, more of the yoga stuff. I definitely write more books. It is very hard to write a book, particularly with chronic neck pain. So if I was healthy, I'd be writing more books. Yeah, well, if I didn't have chronic illness, I wouldn't be writing about fibro. So books. Yeah. Fiction. I'd be writing fiction. Literary romance. Yeah. Like Jane Austen kind of things.
Okay. Interesting.
Outside of the children, I guess the blog is my hobby. But yoga, meditation,
right.
Learning about health and wellness,
right,
and productivity. Yeah. But my stance is all how you make it accessible. So that's probably, if I had more time for more hobbies, that's what I would do.
That's very interesting. Yeah, I guess it wouldn't be called a hobby. It'd be more like a passion, right? Yeah, because I can get irritated when people say
no time,
hobbies do you have to, because I have many hobbies. I just have like two passions in life. That's it, right? Yeah, because like you mentioned, this whole productive society thing, a lot of people kind of see how many hobbies you have, and then they judge you.
Your hobbies, your
based
job.
on that as well, which is another indicator of how successful you are. Hobbies, right? Oh, I do like cycling and photography and this. And they kind of like put you in a box, which is something I don't really like, I suppose. Would you like to tell us more about the new book coming out in May? Or it's out already, right?
Yes. I've done a lot of learning in the last 2 years, and a lot of things have come into place.
Right.
What I realized was where Melissa versus Fibromyalgia was like a buffet or something, with lots of different options and research about it. And so I like to kind of touch on each. What I really wanted to do was write in depth about my key healing pillars, and specifically really have the chance to talk about yoga and meditation and how I use them. Because when you're talking online and you've got short spans, you spend most of that time kind of dispelling myths and being like, but don't worry, it's really accessible, because people's backs get up, because you've all seen the memes, right? Everybody's like, it's going to cure you. And so you have to kind of dispel all those myths before you can even talk about it. So I took the chance to really say, here's the benefits, here's the research, here's how it's helped me, and you can take what you will from it. But it's all of the key things that have really helped me to get from moderate to mild, and just share that journey. I got a little bit more personal. In my old books, I didn't feel like I could talk about like my childhood and some of the potential causes, whereas I went a little bit more into that, and got a little bit more open. And I mean, I've never been not honest. I've always shared a lot, but just I went a little bit further this time. And so it turned out to be a really personal book, but I think it is really great because I think it's complementary, because we're so lucky now. When I wrote my first books and started my blog, there was hardly any information out there about fibro. But now we've got a few really great books and great resources out there. So now I feel like I can stick to my little area of passion, and put my point of view without having to try and spread myself over this whole complex illness. So
that's good.
It was really cathartic and really exciting. And I just kind of wrote it as if I got to, have someone come in my lounge and sit down and go in depth about those things that help me and what I do. That's how I tend to imagine things. Like, what would I tell you somebody from my audience could come and have a real good conversation with me, what would I say?
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
And you run a few courses on yoga for people with chronic pain, is that right? Like accessible yoga. How does that work? You get clients from all over the world.
Have to think about the word accessible, because there's a lot to that word, right? Not only can we do the physical movement, but can we access it at the same time? When do our energy levels align?
Right.
Do we have children and work to get around? So I decided that pre-recorded worked better for me and for my students. So most of my courses and programs are pre-recorded so that people can do the actual class when it suits them. And then depending whether it's fully pre-recorded or whether we're doing like a guided session. So I'm opening a guided session of my foundations program right now as an example. So once a week we meet up together and we have a bit of mentoring and the accountability side of it. So how can we make a habit? When can we make a good time to do our practice? Any questions, demonstrating anything, but still making it so that the physical practice happens when they're able. And also by running it that way with fully pre-recorded or, just a few hours of my time, I can make it obviously much, much less costly. And so, but a lot of it's in bed. I mean, the benefits are not about doing crazy poses. Right. And so that's the main thing, showing people what it can be and how to make it accessible for your body and how to listen to your body so that they can go in any other yoga class and do it safely.
I remember attending some yoga class in person, a pose I think I would be doing right that correct it and say I was doing it wrong and it's not good for my body. So I think that's one tricky aspect of home-based classes is that the teacher can't see your actual alignment. Yeah, but I guess that's more for power pose, not resting in bed in a sense. And like you said, I think the word accessible is very tricky because what does it really mean? I mean, I read quite a number of blogs written by disabled people and they say having a ramp doesn't make your restaurant fully accessible, right? Because every disabled person is different.
Part of making it accessible is making sure that what you're teaching is okay to be done.
Those parts,
on their own. So if you're choosing poses where alignment is not super important, and actually some of those poses are not as rigid, but I'm choosing poses where there's a lot of freedom and movement and poses that, are not likely to get you in trouble.
Yeah.
And I give a lot of cues for how to change it. A lot of breathing. The main thing I'm always saying is
you do a lot of breathing, right?
Yeah. This is for you and your body to decide, which I think is important because we lose a lot of our power when we start dealing with other people and our body. So the main thing I can do is say, does this feel good for you? Yeah.
Yes. One more thing was accessibility. So time zones can be a huge accessibility problem. So that's another tricky part about having classes or podcast interviews online, I think.
Yeah.
If I were to do an interview at 11 p.m., I just wouldn't be functioning. And where can we find you online? You have a blog, social media, any extra information?
I kind of hang out on Instagram. I love to do Instagram stories. So that's at Melissa N. Reynolds. And my YouTube channel is Melissa N. Reynolds and Melissa versus Fibro in brackets. But if you type that in, you'll find it.
Okay.
My own physical ability has changed so much over the last 2 years with pregnancy, pelvic issues, recovering, that I'm very, very wary of just putting tutorials online. There's too much context needed to just throw things up in a short story and stuff.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you for
thank you for
joining us today on the podcast. I really appreciate your time, and I hope you have a great Sunday with your kids.
Thank you for being here with us today on the Sick Lessons podcast. I hope that you found it enjoyable and helpful. Hit the like button to show your support, and subscribe or follow to get the latest episodes. You can also keep in touch with me on social media. All links have been included in the description. Thank you, and looking forward to having you with us for the next episode.